Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Welcome again to the School of Small Business. I am Salome Chung. Welcome to the broadcast. On this show, we talk all things small business. It is my desire and goal to really address the issues facing small business and to provide solutions and strategies to help them to address those issues. If you are new, please share this broadcast with your network, your family, friends. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you for your support. Without you, this broadcast wouldn't reach the audience that I would like to reach. So thank you for that. But without further ado, today's broadcast, I want to address the topic of purpose in business. Business owners, most people in business typically start a business because they either want to introduce a new product or service, or they want to introduce an improved product or service. However, oftentimes we have people who parlay their purpose into their life's work, and that no one embodies that more than my guest today, Dr. Tanya Scotece. Welcome, Tanya. Tanya is a funeral services educator. She's a senior placement specialist, and she's also an expert witness in funeral home litigation. Tanya, I have known Tanya for not very long, but I feel as if I've known her for a very long time. We've become fast friends, and is always someone that I enjoy speaking with and learning from. So Tanya, welcome to the broadcast. Please tell us, how did you get into the line of work you're in? What made you decide that this line of work is your life's work?
Well, first of all, Salome, thank you so much. It is an honor to be here today and to have the opportunity to collaborate with you. And yes, we have become fast friends. And I always like to tell my daughter that you are the most person that I have this exact conversation with over such a period of time. So I know we've spoke many hours. So thank you for having me this evening on your podcast. So to answer your question, my life's purpose actually was a moment in time when I was 12 years old, and I had attended my first wake or visitation, calling hours, depending on where you are in the world. They're called different things, to go view a decedent, a deceased person. And I'm originally from Connecticut, now living right outside Miami, Florida. And I went to my first wake at the age of 12, and it was my mother's friend's mom. So I did not know the deceased when she was living. And I was greeted by the men in black with the chandeliers at the funeral home. And I had no emotional attachment to the deceased. And I was just mesmerized. That's the word I'm going to use, mesmerized. And I was so just captivated that I walked up to the casket, and I see this woman laid out in the casket, beautifully dressed, makeup. And I remember saying to my mom, like, can I touch her? Like, I didn't know, I never saw a dead person. And my mom is like, no, you're supposed to let them rest in peace. You're supposed to say a prayer. So I'm like, okay. So I said a prayer and I sat down like I was supposed to. And I was a very shy kid. Like, I was not a very rambunctious or, outgoing child. And I remember sitting down and I see all these people walking down the hallway. So I turned and I looked outside and I said, where are all these people going? And there was another wake visitation or calling hours to a man. And I said to my mom, can I go visit him? And she's like, you're supposed to know the people, like not just barge in on people's wakes. Like, they have the wedding crashers, right? So I guess I started as a very young
Funeral crasher.
crasher. So I went and I paid my respects by myself. My mother did not come down the hall with me. And literally, Salome, when I tell you that moment at the age of 12 years old, it struck me, like it captivated me. And life puts us on a detour, whether sometimes we want it or not. And I always love your expression, Salome, that the universe autocorrects, right?
Yes.
So at the age of 12 years old, there I was, fascinated by this wake, went back to my normal business, ended up 21 years in medical office administration as a medical assistant. And somehow, some way, I was in my mid-30s. I was managing Dr. Kenneth Kern's office in Hartford, Connecticut. And I don't know. There's no reason to this day of how or why I went into work. I did not think about this. I did not dream about it. I did not research it. I picked up a phone and I called a funeral home in Connecticut. And I just asked them, I said, I don't know what you people call yourselves, but I want to be what you people are.
Wow.
By that afternoon, I was sitting in the director of the mortuary program in Connecticut. And by the time that Dr. Kern came out of surgery that afternoon, I'm asking him if I could have Tuesday afternoons off at 3 p.m. so I could go to mortuary school. Well, he thought I almost like lost my mind. It's like, you're going to do what? Like, why? What is the reason? There was no reason. There was absolutely no reason. So for me
So
to answer,
you kind of felt just called to do this.
Called, but it was truly, and I know everyone has their own beliefs, whether it's, in universe or divinely inspired or religious, whatever people believe, they believe. But this was something above me because I did not seek it out. It sought me out. So I went to mortuary school in my mid-30s. I was a single mom. My daughter was about 7 at the time. And I just continued with the academics and the studies. And I did not have like a set goal. It wasn't like, oh, I want to be this because I want to work here. There was no really step by step. It was more just like wherever I'm supposed to be, I want to be. So that is a long-winded answer to your question about my life's purpose, about being in the funeral profession. And that has morphed also because I was working for Michelle Farley Williams and John Williams on the west coast of Florida for Farley Funeral Homes and Crematory for just under 13 years. And I had done my internship there and stayed on and became a manager of their funeral homes and cemetery. And again, didn't seek this out. It was just the opportunities arose. I love marketing, community outreach, education. And I stayed in school long enough I eventually left the funeral home and then landed the job at Miami-Dade College as a full-time professor.
Awesome. What a journey. And along this journey, what would you say, two observations I want to make. What challenges, if any, did you encounter as a woman in the industry? And if you didn't have any challenges, what led you from being in the just by happenstance working for a mortuary company to wanting to be a licensed mortician?
So to answer your first question,
and if it, sorry to interrupt, and if going back to the challenges question, what would you advise a woman wanting to enter this field? What were the challenges you experienced, and what advice would you give?
So mortuary field or funeral world, some people like to say we're so different than other fields, but when we're dealing with people, right, it doesn't matter what field we're in, it's people. So you have your challenges with people. There's your bully type of personalities. You have your people that really empower you and support you. And I think it's like luck of the draw, like where you end up. So the challenges, I did experience challenges. First of all, the first challenge was base level was understanding academia. Like I did not go to a traditional 4-year college after high school. I don't sit in an ivory tower behind my degrees. So I was a working person from the age of 16 up until my mid-30s, and, couple of failed marriages and, things that didn't work out, challenges, trials, and tribulations. I had my daughter who is, aspiration of my life. I love her to death. And she literally just was the force behind my initiative to take on going to school. So the initial challenge wasn't so much thinking about going to school, was sitting in classrooms with people who were half my age that seemed to get it right out of the gate. And I hadn't been in school, and the brain is just different as an adult, learning and trying to navigate. Like, I was a good worker. I could go to work, do what was expected of me, and collect my paycheck and call it a day. The academic world has its own challenges. So being not only female, but just an adult in a more of a I was non-traditional compared to a lot of the traditional students. So that was one challenge. Going into the mortuary field, traditionally and historically, that has been a male-dominated field. The statistics have changed right now. The last actual statistic that I read was 52% of females. It actually may be higher. It actually may be much higher than that. Currently, I can't cite any journals off the top of my head, but it's a higher number of females entering the profession. However, even though they're entering the profession, or they did back in the day, back in 2005, when I ventured into the profession, there was still a very high prevalence of men dominating in the form of owners, managers, and funeral directors. So because I chose the education path, when I started working in the funeral home, I went in as an intern. So to answer your question, it wasn't that I was working as a funeral assistant or funeral attendant or transport person. I was already going in with the goal of becoming a licensed funeral director, embalmer. So the challenges, I would say, like other people, right, that, going back to school is a whole undertaking literally in itself. Being faced with not knowing the process, not knowing how to study, not knowing what the expectation is. It's a different wiring of the brain than maybe going to college right out of high school and then maybe going back for a degree later on. So I started literally my academic journey at the age of 35. Wow. I stayed in school full time, never took a break, summers, winters, springs, back in the seasons in Connecticut. And I just stayed in school. So when I relocated from Connecticut to Florida, I transferred in to the baccalaureate degree for my bachelor's at the University of South Florida. And I just continued the academic journey. So every time I started something new, the challenges that I faced first were people who you might think are your friends or your colleagues. Why are you going to school? Like, what are you doing this for? So almost like and you may not have, I did not have an answer. One may not have an answer. It was just, I don't know. And it was like, well, do you need to do this? Like, what's the reason? Is there a job? Like, what do you look? And it wasn't a certain job. It was, I don't know. I just want to do it. So sometimes having to face those, not questions, but just almost feeling like you're defending yourself with friends or family about why you're doing what you're doing. And you really have no logical reason. It wasn't like, oh, I want to be a medical doctor, or oh, I want to be an attorney, or I want to be a banker or a plumber. Like, you have very logistic steps to become any of the above mentioned. Exactly. I did not seek out academia. That was not an initiative to say, oh, I want to go on this path because I want to end up here. It literally took me on this journey.
So, isn't it though, Tanya, like every other endeavor or business an individual might want to partake in, and you kind of would expect the support of family, friends, acquaintances, but that seems to always be I don't want to say obstacle, but a challenge, where, like you say, friends, family would say, well, why are you doing this? For what reason? And it's important for people who are entering any business or are trying to achieve their purpose, not to listen to the naysayers, but exactly. just to go for if it's your passion, just go for it.
Right. And sometimes, and I see it now as a death care educator on the academic side. at the beginning of my semesters, I always, some of my students, they get so frustrated with me, Salome. They're like, will she stop with the introductions? Why do we got to sit here and introduce? Because I want to know my people. I want to know who the students are. I want them to know me. I want to make that connection. So I take the time. I'll take 1 or 2 classes beginning of the semester, and we'll go through name by name and ask questions and answers, because I feel that that connection is so important to understanding why are we here. And sometimes, it's amazing what unveils in those introductions, because not everyone has the support. There are many that do, and their vision or perspective is, oh, we're all supported. It's like, no, that's not true. I've seen through the academics, sometimes people actually lose friends along that path, get divorced, because not
Absolutely.
everybody supports everybody, So
It sounds melodramatic, but it's really not. You really do lose friends, partners, family members, because of some choices that you make for the better. And it's interesting, I thought, well, why is that? You would think they would want what's best for you, as a reason for choosing to go along whatever path it is that you choose. But that is something that I've always found to be interesting, that the people closest to you, some of them you lose along the way. And I often think it's as you say, I'm a big believer in the universe. It's the universe clearing a path for you. It's the universe clearing away the obstacles in your way that you don't really need. So
yeah. And I think it almost comes from a growth, like a personal growth, right? And now whether somebody wants to space spiritual, okay, that's another perspective, but just a personal growth. So you can understand that if you're with somebody, not everybody is growing at the same time. So you can outgrow relationships or friendships. And there's other people that, for whatever the reason is, I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, that's my daughter's area, but some people are more like under the thing, like, I'm happy if I hear that you're having issues. I don't want to, so
misery loves company.
Misery loves company. Yeah, the old adage, right? So for me personally, to go back to your question about the trials and tribulations, yes, I've experienced it. And then I'm very, very proactive. I like very solution-driven things. I'm very collaborative. Not everyone is collaborative. I don't live in a scarcity mentality. And there's a lot of people think it's like, you're going to take my job. I'm not going to share information because you're going to take my job, or this very territorial. And in funeral directing, there's a lot of type A personalities, okay, like myself, but they want to hold on to their knowledge. And I've never been that person. I'm the type of person that I like to be the resource. I like to have the most information for someone to share and to be able to guide them to the best. I don't want people to, the old, I walk to school and you got to walk to school the 5 miles in the snow. Like, I don't believe that. That's not me. So for me personally, the academic journey, it just evolved. It was like it morphed. And then it came to a point that when I completed my PhD in 2015, I stayed on with the funeral home another 3 years. So it wasn't that I just left, but I felt that I wanted to utilize the skills that I went to school for. And a colleague of mine, Melanie Wysinski, who I went to graduate school with, actually reached out, and she was like, Tanya, did you see this job at the Miami-Dade College? And I'm like, I'm not even on any academic websites. It's like, no, I didn't see it. And she's like, well, this job sounds like it's tailor-made for you. And I'm like, well, send it over. I never really looked at an academic job. And I read the credentials and the requirements, and I'm like, wow, this does sound tailor-made. So I applied for the job, and I landed the job as a full-time faculty at Miami-Dade College. And I remember, Salome, and you and I have talked heart to heart on this topic. You can't chase a dollar in this world, right? You can't chase the dollar. I'm not saying that money doesn't come to people that do good, but just going after a dollar, it's almost like that dollar always gets away, right? And you can never quite catch it. It's like never enough. So literally, I got the job offer, and I'm at the funeral home. And at that time, I've since caught up, but at that time, the finances, it was like off kilter, right? We're talking huge amounts of money left behind, not going towards, okay? And I didn't know, like, should I not take this job because it's not as profitable as what I'm doing now? And I went out into the parking lot in Venice, Florida. Anybody that knows Venice, Florida, right? Was in the parking lot. And I just said, show me a sign that I'm supposed to take this job. Okay. And I didn't even know what I was looking for. It wasn't that I had a sign at that time, but there was this beautiful black feather in the middle of the parking lot, right by itself. There was no birds around. Now, maybe it was there all day. I don't know. I had never seen one in my life, and I had been there almost 13 years. I picked up that feather, and I'm like, we're going to Miami. So that's how it happens. I mean, but it's funny because, asking me direct questions, it's like, I never really sit back and think to myself like, wow, how did I get into a full-time academic position? It just kind of evolved. And then, as you know, in January, I took over as the program coordinator of the funeral service education program at the college, which was another layer, but again, not sought out.
Sought after. And that's the thing about if you're in your right space and on the right journey, excuse me, the path will open up for you. That's just how it works. When I find when things aren't working out for you, it's probably not where you're supposed to be. So to continue, what would you're in charge of a lot of people. And as you said earlier, you're always trying to get to know them. Who are your people? What are their goals? How can you best serve them? So in that spirit, what advice would you give? Let's talk about anyone who might be listening, or someone may see us on YouTube. What advice would you give someone who may be thinking about entering the funeral services industry? And what advice, same question for your students. Once you get to know them, how do you serve, what's the approach you use to serve them best?
So for me personally, I feel like I'm in a servant leadership role. Like I am here to serve my students, and I do my best, to get to know them, connect with them, understand who they are and what they're about, and vice versa. And I feel that the preparation to going into mortuary field is one that I do spend time at the beginning of each semester with the classes, especially our newer students that are incoming to the program, that it's not a 9-to-5 glamorous job. I mean, it is 24/7, holidays, weekends. People don't die between 9 and 5. I mean, people die every day of all different types of deaths, and seeing death every day is not normal for a human to experience. I mean, even physicians who see it, it's in a different realm. Okay. So being prepared for the unknown, you have to be able to very proficiently pivot. So somebody that likes things very regimented it will be horrible for them to go into the mortuary world, because you never know what you're going into. You may have a 4-car accident and now you're serving many people all at one time. You may get called in, somebody else is called out sick, and now you're taking over for them. So people that can't just kind of pivot and go with the flow wherever you're supposed to be, it's not for them. And I can tell personality-wise how people act in the classroom, usually where, I'm not like a fortune teller or anything, but I can just see or almost predict if they get frustrated because something isn't exactly right, or, there's a technology issue and they get so frustrated. It's like, this field is probably not going to be the best, because it's ever changing constantly. Also, you're working with other like-minded territorial people, right? Most funeral directors are in charge of many families at one time, especially if it's a busy funeral home, and you're multitasking constantly. So you have to be able to delegate. You have to be able to take help when needed. And not everyone has that skill set. Some of the students that I see are fixated on wanting to work on the deceased, such as the prep room, in the restorative art sections, in the embalming, which is fine, except that in itself can be very limiting, especially it's a lot of wear and tear on your own body. You're standing for long hours, so I've seen a lot of embalmers have back knee issues. So if your focus is on that in your 20s, by the time you're maybe in your 40s, what are you going to do if you pigeonholed yourself into being a specific embalmer? So for me, having the incoming students, my verb that I like to use is inspire. I love to inspire the students. I love to tell them the facets, the good, the bad, about the position, about the profession, about the choices that they can make, and also not to have them limited by an associate of science degree in funeral service education. They can use it as a stepping stone if they want. Maybe they want to go on the medical examiner side or forensic side or crime scene or continue to become an educator. But some people, I think we have it, a lot of us, and I used to be like this, you may have an end goal, right? So it's like, well, I want to get through this program because I want to go work. I said, well, you might be bored out of your mind working for a funeral home for 5 years straight, and you're going to be happy that you stayed in school. So for me, what education has done, it has given me a window of an opportunity that if people don't know where they should be in school. Because in school, they're going to have the resources, where it's an opposite mindset. Sometimes people will say, well, I don't want to go to school until I know what I want to be. Right. So it's fascinating as an educator because I see all kinds of students. I have students with doctoral degrees. I have, I have a few that are, doctor of pharmacy. I have some are coming out of, executive leadership, educational leadership, social workers, psychologists, pastors. So people are coming in. They're not all the traditional 20-year-old students. We have many that are different walks of life, different faces, different.
Why do you think those people choose to come back and enter a program such as funeral services?
So I would say 1/3 of them have a calling, truly have a calling. Like it's something they can't even describe. They don't know why. It's kind of like me at 12 years old that's impressed with the chandelier and the men in black suits. It's something of a calling. The other 2/3, 1/3 is because they had a positive experience at a funeral home and they want to emulate that. Like, for example, like, oh, let's say my grandma passed and I was treated so nice and it was so kind and I want to be like that person that helped me. So that's 1/3 of the students coming in, wanting to be helping people through a difficult time. And lastly, there's people that had a horrible experience and think that they could do a better job than what they experienced. They feel like the profession needs more professionals. So that's, in my viewpoint, the 3 very distinct categories about why people are coming into the profession. Now, with the pandemic, I think the pandemic has shed much light on death care, because prior to it, we don't usually talk about death every day. I mean, okay, if you watch the news, something's happening that's, death related, but to have, 2, 3, couple of years of constant reminders of death has shed light on humanity overall, right? And it's nothing political. It's just what, the reality of it. So from what we've seen, and the last statistic that I've seen at Miami-Dade College was a 62% enrollment is higher at the college in our program since the pandemic. So, which leads me to share with you that I think some people are fascinated by it. Some people are just wanting to be there for something above them. But my goal is to really hone in on what the profession is as far as expectations, how to be successful and how not to pigeon yourself into a job that may not be for you. And it doesn't mean that you can't be in the profession. It just may be maybe a typical traditional funeral home may not be the path of choice 5 years out.
Awesome. As I'm listening to you speak, it seems when I think of funeral services, death services, it's kind of like being a teacher. It takes a special person to be really successful at it, A, and B, to really deliver the best service. Because sometimes you can go into a mortuary office and don't necessarily get the best service. It's about your loved one has passed. Here's what we offer. How much money do you have? Do you have insurance? How much is the payout? Let's give me your money and let's get this person buried. For me, that's that's happened. But I feel from talking to you, and I've had conversations with other people in the debt services industry, and when you have a passion for it, and it is really your calling, you're not so much focused. Yes, you want to guide the deceased, regarding the financial part of it, but what you're there to deliver is service, and the financial part takes care of itself. But I make that observation to say, you've told me about what has attracted people in general to the profession, but do people come in just because they want to do it because they want a job? It would seem to me that maybe you wouldn't get a lot of people like that entering the industry. You might have someone who wants a job and maybe gets kind of like a support staff job in a mortuary, but they don't necessarily want to go to college to be able to do that job. What's your experience with students entering the program? Are they just after a job? I know you say a lot of people come in because of their calling, but do people come into mortuary service just as it's kind of like professional preachers. They don't really have the calling to be a preacher, but it's a professional thing. Do you find that in mortuary sciences?
I don't, for the reason being that usually like on the first day of class, I will address that if you just want to work in a funeral home and help out and drive a hearse or drive a van or go on a transfer to pick up a decedent, you don't need to be in mortuary school. Like you could do that. That's, there's a dime a dozen jobs out there. If you want to do transport, if you want to just help out, that's not requiring a funeral director or embalmer license. The school aspect is because specifically in Florida, under our state statute, chapter 497, in order to meet with a family who has had somebody that's passed, so we refer to that as at need, like an at need situation, you either have to be an intern, like working directly under a funeral director, or be a funeral director to meet with that family. So there's many opportunities for people, let's say, that want to go into a pre-need or family service counseling, helping families. They're acting very similar to a funeral director in that they're working, all intents and purposes. They're planning a funeral before the person passes. They're taking all the vital information, planning the services, religious, non-religious, flowers, everything that's related. And they're not funeral directors, right? So there's many things that people do. And I really don't want people thinking that they have to go to mortuary school to work in a funeral home, because that's a fallacy. Now, on the flip side, I do survey my students, again, those first 2 classes of every semester, like, why are you here? What is the reason? And once in a while, I'll get somebody because it's lucrative. And I'm like, if that's the only reason why you're here, there's plenty of other jobs that are more lucrative than funeral services. Because as you know, Salome, you and I've had many conversations. Most funeral directors look expensive, right? We're wearing black suits, we look polished, but the reality is we're not wearing suits that you wear to a wedding or a banquet. Our suits need to be durable to be able to sustain, fluids,
Wear and
liquids.
tear, yeah.
Right. So, but it's just a look. But the image that people think it's like we're driving, nice cars. Well, unless you own the funeral home or manage the funeral home, most funeral directors' base salaries are not that of other types of fields out there. So that's why I say to the students not to get enchanted or disillusioned by what they see. Because again, it's kind of like that carrot that you can never achieve or never sustain, right?
Right.
So my goal as an educator and now as the program coordinator is to really hone in on people that want to make this a profession, that want the calling to come to fruition. And many students, right, just like we discussed, whether it's their inner voice or somebody else's voice that's impeding, has prevented them. And it's like some around there, they come around every few years, trying again, and something will derail them. So my job is to really, get them in the school, get them in the program, educate them to the best of my ability, and then get them out in the real world. We're a work-based institution, meaning that our job is to get them into the real world as funeral directors. So I think, I know there's AI, artificial intelligence, and a lot of, talk about DNA, but to the best of my knowledge, we haven't stopped death, right? So it's a field that there's going to be a need. Okay.
But
So,
it's interesting that you talk about AI and DNA, because that was going to be, my next question. What's the future of funeral service?
yes.
What are the what's coming down the pipe that's going to impact funeral services, that's going to make it better? What are the new innovations you see? What would you like to see that's going to make what you offer to the public better, and make funeral services experiences for the public better?
So you had mentioned something a short time ago that you had, quote unquote, like a negative experience about being like, kind of like honed around money and a situation, right, that you described. So what's interesting about most families, right, most people, and now obviously some people have more deaths in their family than others, but generally speaking, most people are probably making arrangements, I don't know, once every 7 to 12 years, let's say, right? It's not something that you're doing every day.
Yeah.
So we talk about going out to dinner to a restaurant or traveling or going shopping, right? Consumers know pretty much, like, you can go what grocery store to go to, what pharmacy to shop at, what type of mall you want to go to, what type of restaurant you want to go to. When it comes to death, it's like people don't realize they have choices, right? They can choose the funeral home. They can shop the funeral home. They can, it's really consumer friendly. It's consumer based. I mean, we're governed by the Federal Trade Commission. All prices are disclosed ahead of time. So there are no secrets, but I think the consumer picks and chooses from the field of what they want, and they think they have the whole package. And it's like, oh, why do we need a funeral director? What is the reason? So a funeral director's responsibility is to provide options, and it should be all options, right? Every family, every time, no exceptions, no assumptions, to be able to educate a family about what they can do for their loved one. And a lot of families are facing this at need, meaning that the person may have been alive and well this morning and has passed for some reason. And now families are in, quote, crisis mode, right? So funeral director's responsibility is to educate that family about all of the options for what they can do. So The second part of your question is specifically related to the future of funeral services regarding AI or anything like that. So we do
What's
see,
the technology?
yeah,
Yeah, what's the technology behind the
yeah.
services?
Yeah, so we do see more people nowadays, right? And this is religion specific and culture specific. So I'll preface it with that. But some people are looking more for example, clippings of the loved one's hair or DNA type of analysis to hold on. So we see more, there's more of for example, companies out there that do thumbprints and they turn the thumbprints into jewelry. And there's a lot with the cremated remains. There's a lot more with markers and the QR codes on the headstones at the cemeteries, sharing the person's story. There's a lot with a company with TribuCast, for example. They do live webcasting of the services. So the technology, specifically through COVID, right, has kind of transformed what we do and how we do it. What I find interesting is I teach funeral history, funeral directing, right, at the college. And sometimes what people think of as new is actually just the circle of life coming full circle. So when I hear students like, Professor, can we have a wake in their home? And I'm thinking, yeah, you can have a wake in their home, but where do you think it started? Yeah, where do we begin? That's where we began. Like funerals homes did so much.
People can't even wrap their mind around the fact that the body was is just kept in the home.
That's where they started from.
In the person's home, and people would come to your home to view the body, not at a facility. Exactly. That's where it all began. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
The way funeral and death services and everything associated with the deceased has really evolved over time. You and I have talked about the technology around funeral services, and now they have where, you can visit the deceased via technology. They have different devices that you can have at the grave where loved ones who are maybe in another country or another state can visit the deceased or be part of the actual what takes place with the deceased. So to me, all that is so interesting. But to your point, things really haven't changed that much. For people who are here now in the world, for them it seems new. But for the older generation, that's just where it all began.
Right. So like I will use, for example, a colleague of mine, Glenda Stansberry of Insight Institute. She has a program for having folks become celebrants, certified celebrants, be able to deliver eulogies and, have a non-traditional service or incorporating even aspects of religion. But that has taken off. That was a new turn with offering celebrant services. So people that are not necessarily religious can still have a beautiful celebration of life, but it's a little bit more than just a celebration of life like a free-for-all. It's a structured program that they have that's available. So that was new. That was a newer program. When people start talking about alternative types of disposition, that's another quote unquote buzzword: aquamation, watermation, natural organic reduction, human composting, green burial. You'll hear a lot of hype around that.
Are those specializations, Tanya? Can someone wanting to get into death services choose one of those avenues you're talking about, yes, non-traditional avenues as a profession?
Yes.
And does the college offer courses in those particular areas?
So the requirement, and I'm only speaking specifically for Florida because I'm only licensed in Florida, to be able to work with an at-need family, again, meaning that a death has occurred, for regardless of what the disposition is, generally speaking, it's usually a licensed funeral director or an intern working with the family. So Florida has a couple of unique, there's a quote unquote direct disposer license, and that does not require mortuary school. So there are some unique pathways that people can offer. I want to say alternative services. The issue, or not the issue, the greater question is how many people are really looking for that type of service, right? And the way I teach it, so to answer your question, there are different certifications. Florida also has a college certificate, or Florida certificate. At the college, we offer it as a college certificate. That is, if someone just wants to become a director and not an embalmer, and they have a 2-year degree or higher in any other field, they can come in and they can just do what they call the art sections and get licensed as a funeral director and not have anything to do with embalming. And then the direct disposer, which is also in Florida, can allow someone to pretty much with a background check, to pretty, not laborious classes, be able to get their license as a direct disposer. So there are paths that are available for folks, and not to mention the industry as far as the marketing side. I mean, as far as, small businesses, I mean, a lot of people want to go, they open up cremation jewelry businesses, memory glass, we have the parting stone, we have memory pearls, we have algordanza, life gems, stummies, precious memories. There's company after company after company that either offer a product or a service. And I'm speaking to Justin Crow with Parting Stone for a service which is solidified remains into an actual stone. So
Wow.
there's many different offerings out there. So there's many opportunities. Maybe someone doesn't really want to go work in a funeral home, but wants to be part of the death care movement. Let's call it that, Salome, right? The death care movement that wants to open up a business. And I have a couple of students. One is a chef, Chef Winnie, and that's her passion. And she's, gung-ho, and she's, she loves providing the repast. And, that's like a segue for her. I have other folks coming in that really have, specific niches with memorialization, that are very creative on the technology side with headstones, monuments. So there's something for everyone, even if it's not, quote unquote, working in a funeral home for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
So it clearly is a industry as opposed to a profession, because you've got the traditional path, and then you've got where where technology and the internet has really opened up a host of other opportunities, as with other businesses, but it's really unique, I think, in the funeral services industry.
Yes.
So, Tanya, it's been such a pleasure having you. For those people who may want to connect with you, where is the best place for them to find you? I know you're on LinkedIn. I don't know where else on social media they can find you, but tell the people how they can further connect with you.
Sure. So I don't have a TV since I started mortuary school. So that is, so I don't watch TV, but I'm very, I love LinkedIn. I live on LinkedIn is what I tell my students. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to connect with me. You can also contact me via Miami-Dade College. The contact information is on the website, mdc.edu. So those are probably the two best avenues to reach me. You had mentioned earlier, I did get into expert witness testimony. So I do, if anyone has any wrongdoings with funeral homes or cemeteries, that's another avenue that people may not be that familiar with, that people can venture into. And then the senior placement, which you had mentioned also earlier, that was just a passion. My dad was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia in 2020, passed away November 4th, 2022. And that's just been a heartfelt, blessed work where I'm like the matchmaker between families and communities, and we're a free placement agency. So I wear many hats, but I just feel like I want the universe to put me in a position where my skills and expertise is best utilized. Sometimes, my students see me and it's like, okay, she's made up and she's got the black suit, but I say it's almost like seeing the iceberg picture in the, the picture that I'm talking about. Like there's a lot under the scenes, behind the scenes. So, there's trials and tribulations amongst any journey. I just try my best to come from a position of authentic leadership, inspirational leadership, as I call it, willing to help anyone that I can. So if anyone out there, listener, viewer, anyone that I can help or support with whatever question, no question is too small. I'm always available for any type of dialogue, and be a resource to people. So Salome, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You and me, like, we're soul sisters, and I always enjoy the collaboration. We never know where our conversations
are going to lead. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Tanya. It was such a pleasure. And for those of you listening in, and for those of you who are going to catch us on YouTube, please remember to subscribe and to share the video. Tanya shared what she shared with us today has been really eye-opening to me. I particularly am struck by just the expanse of the funeral services industry, and just the possibilities for anyone who's thinking of a career in funeral services. So once again, thank you all for tuning in to this broadcast, and I hope to see you all again soon. And until then, be well, and don't forget to tune in. We are a weekly broadcast, and you can catch past and future episodes on YouTube. So thank you for tuning in, and be well.